On a freezing winter day, Keith Quinlan did something most people wouldn't even think of doing when he spotted a funeral procession. This seemingly ordinary truck driver's extraordinary act of respect is going viral for all the right reasons. Keith Quinlan wasn't a man who sought attention. He was, in the simplest terms, ordinary. Middle-aged, with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of years spent gripping a steering wheel. He drove a truck for a living. Long hauls mostly, the kind that left him bone-tired, but with a quiet sense of accomplishment. He wasn't married. Not anymore. A divorce, amicable enough but still leaving a lingering echo of loneliness, had settled him into a routine of solitary miles and quiet evenings in his small apartment on the outskirts of town. He had a couple of close friends, the kind you could count on one hand, the kind you didn't need to talk to every day to know they were there. This particular day was biting cold. Winter had sunk its teeth into the landscape, and the highway stretched before him, a ribbon of gray asphalt bordered by fields dusted with a thin layer of frost. The wind howled, rattling the windows of his truck, a constant, mournful drone that mirrored the ache in his lower back. He'd been on the road for hours, the endless miles blurring together. His mind drifted, as it often did on these long hauls, flitting between thoughts of the upcoming delivery, the bills he needed to pay, and the slightly stale coffee he'd picked up at a truck stop hours ago. He cranked the heat higher, the warm air blasting against his face a small comfort against the encroaching chill. He even allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile, thinking about the warm meal he'd treat himself to when he finally reached his destination. A little bit of normalcy, a little bit of reward for the long day. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fading orange. The light was failing, casting long, skeletal shadows from the bare trees that lined the highway. It was the kind of light that made you feel small, insignificant, a solitary figure in a vast, indifferent world. Keith shifted in his seat, trying to find a more comfortable position. The loneliness of the road was a familiar companion, but on days like this, it felt particularly heavy. He glanced in his rearview mirror, mostly out of habit, a quick check of the empty road behind him, and that's when he saw them. At first, it was just a flicker of headlights, distant and indistinct. He dismissed them, assuming it was just another driver, another soul battling the miles and the cold. But as the lights grew closer, a pattern began to emerge. A procession, slow-moving, deliberate, with flashing amber lights cutting through the gathering gloom. Police cars, their presence immediately setting them apart from ordinary traffic. They were escorting a line of vehicles, each with its headlights on, a silent, somber parade. Keith squinted, leaning forward slightly, trying to get a better look in his rearview mirror. The wind buffeted his truck, a physical manifestation of the unease that was beginning to prickle at the back of his neck. Something about this was different. Something about this felt final. And then he saw it. The hearse. The unmistakable shape. The somber black. The flag draped over the back. A funeral procession. Someone's last ride. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't just a collection of cars. It was a story, a life ending. And in that instant, without conscious thought, without hesitation, Keith knew what he had to do. His foot slammed on the brake pedal, the truck lurching to a stop on the shoulder of the highway. The sudden deceleration threw him forward against the steering wheel, but he barely registered the impact. He was already throwing the truck in a park, his movements quick, almost frantic. He didn't even bother to turn off the engine. He flung open the door, the frigid air rushing in like a slap in the face. He hadn't even grabbed his coat. He was standing there, exposed to the elements, in nothing but a thin, worn t-shirt. The wind tore at him, instantly raising goosebumps on his arms and sending a shiver down his spine. His teeth began to chatter, an involuntary reaction to the sudden, intense cold. He could feel the chill seeping into his bones, numbing his fingers and toes. But he didn't move. He didn't even consider going back for his coat. His entire focus was on the procession, now drawing steadily closer. The flashing lights of the police escort pulsed in the fading light, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding landscape. He could hear the low rumble of the engines, a mournful symphony accompanying the silent grief. As the first car passed, Keith stood at attention. His posture was ramrod straight, his shoulders squared, his chin lifted. He wasn't a military man, not anymore, but the ingrained discipline from his younger years, a brief stint in the National Guard, resurfaced instinctively. His right hand snapped up in a crisp, precise salute. It was a gesture of respect, of reverence, of solidarity. It was a silent acknowledgement of a life lived, a service rendered. He held the salute, unwavering, as each car passed. He didn't know who was inside the hearse, didn't know their story, their accomplishments, their struggles. But he knew that they deserved this. They deserved to be honored, to be remembered. Thoughts, fragmented and fleeting, raced through his mind. He remembered his grandfather, a World War II veteran, buried with full military honors. He remembered the solemn faces, the crisp uniforms, the haunting sound of taps. He remembered the feeling of profound loss, but also of profound respect. He thought of his own father, a police officer who had died in the line of duty years ago. The pain of that loss still lingered, a dull ache in his heart. He remembered the outpouring of support from the community, the strangers who had lined the streets to pay their respects. He thought about the sacrifices that men and women in uniform made every day, the risks they took to protect others. He felt a surge of gratitude, a deep appreciation for their service, their dedication, their courage. And he felt a pang of empathy for the family in those cars, the family who was now facing a future without their loved one. He imagined their grief, their sorrow, their sense of loss. He knew in that moment that he was doing the right thing. He was offering a small gesture of comfort, a silent message of support in a time of profound pain. His hand remained frozen in the salute, his arm aching with the cold, his fingers numb. But he wouldn't lower it, not until the last car had passed. He owed them that. He owed them his respect. Richard Hogan Jr. sat in the back of one of the limousines, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. He wasn't really seeing it, though. His mind was elsewhere, lost in a fog of grief and disbelief. His father, Sergeant Richard Hogan, retired deputy of the Lear County Sheriff's Department, was gone. 12 years of peaceful retirement, snatched away by the cruel indifference of natural causes. Richard Jr. was trying to hold it together. He was the eldest, the responsible one. He had to make arrangements, comfort his mother, deal with the endless stream of condolences. He had to be strong. But inside, he was crumbling. The loss of his father, his hero, his rock, had left a gaping hole in his life. He stared out the window, his vision blurred by unshed tears. The highway was a blur of gray and brown, the scenery monotonous and depressing. He felt numb, disconnected from the world around him. He was just going through the motions, trying to get through the day, trying to get through the funeral, trying to get through the rest of his life without his father. And then he saw him, a figure standing on the side of the road, a lone silhouette against the fading light. At first, Richard Jr. barely registered the image. His mind was too preoccupied, too consumed by grief. But as the car drew closer, he noticed something unusual. The figure was standing at attention, his hand raised in a salute. Richard Jr. frowned, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his sorrow. Who was this man? Why was he saluting? He leaned forward, straining to get a better look. He saw the thin t-shirt, the wind whipping at the man's exposed skin. He saw the unwavering posture, the determined expression on the man's face. And then it hit him. This wasn't just a random gesture. This was an act of respect, a tribute to his father. A stranger, someone who didn't even know them, was honoring his father's service, his father's life. A wave of emotion washed over Richard Jr. His eyes welled up with tears. This time not just tears of grief, but tears of gratitude. His throat tightened, making it difficult to breathe. He felt a lump forming in his chest, a mixture of sorrow and appreciation. He watched as the man held the salute, unwavering, until their car had passed. He couldn't hear anything over the hum of the engine, but he could see the man's lips moving, as if he were whispering a silent prayer. The image stayed with Richard Jr. long after they had driven past. It was a small thing, a fleeting moment, but it had a profound impact on him. It was a reminder that his father's life had mattered, that his service had been appreciated, that he was not alone in his grief. It was a spark of warmth in the cold darkness of his loss. A stranger's act of kindness, a silent message of solidarity, had touched his heart in a way he could never have imagined. He knew, in that moment, that he had to find this man. He had to thank him. Keith climbed back into his truck, the cab feeling strangely warm after the biting cold outside. He started the engine, letting the heater run for a few minutes before putting the truck in gear. He sat there for a moment, his hands wrapped around the steering wheel, his mind still replaying the scene that had just unfolded. He felt a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction. He hadn't done much, really, just a simple gesture, but it felt right. It felt important. He knew that he would never forget that moment, that image of the funeral procession, that feeling of shared humanity. He continued his journey, the miles stretching before him, but he was no longer quite so alone. The act of respect had connected him, however briefly, to something larger than himself. Meanwhile, Richard Hogan Jr. was on a mission. He couldn't shake the image of the man on the side of the road. He felt a powerful need to express his gratitude, to let this stranger know how much his gesture had meant. He started asking questions. He talked to the other people in the procession, the police officers, the funeral home staff. Nobody had seen the man's face clearly, but someone remembered the make and model of the truck, a detail that had been obscured by the fading light. Richard Jr. also turned to social media. He posted a description of the man, the truck, and the incident, asking if anyone had any information. He wasn't sure if it would work, but he felt compelled to try. He had to find this man. He had to thank him. The post spread quickly. People were touched by the story, by the stranger's act of kindness. They shared it, commented on it, offered their support. And then a breakthrough. Someone recognized the description of the truck. They knew Keith Quinlan. They gave Richard Jr. his contact information. Richard Jr. hesitated for a moment before calling. He wasn't sure what to say. How do you thank someone for such a profound gesture? He took a deep breath and dialed the number. Keith answered on the third ring. His voice was hesitant, a little wary. "Hello. Hello," Richard Jr. said, his voice thick with emotion. "My name is Richard Hogan Jr. I was in my father's funeral procession yesterday. You were on the side of the road. You saluted." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Keith spoke, his voice softer now, filled with understanding. "Yes, I just wanted to thank you," Richard Jr. said, the words tumbling out. "It meant the world to me, to my family. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Keith was taken aback. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected anything. "It was the least I could do," he said humbly. "Your father, he deserved to be honored." They talked for a while, Richard Jr. explaining who his father was, what he had done. Keith listened patiently, offering words of comfort and support. They arranged to meet, to talk in person. The meeting took place a few days later at a small, quiet coffee shop. The atmosphere was initially awkward, a little hesitant. Two strangers, brought together by a shared moment of grief and respect. But as they started talking, the awkwardness faded. They found common ground, a shared understanding of loss, of service, of the importance of human connection. Richard Jr. told Keith how much his father had loved his job, how dedicated he had been to serving his community. He talked about his father's sense of humor, his kindness, his unwavering integrity. Keith listened intently, his eyes filled with empathy. He shared his own stories, his own experiences with loss and grief. They talked for hours, sharing stories, sharing memories, sharing a connection that transcended their different backgrounds, their different lives. They were no longer strangers. They were two men, bound together by a shared moment of humanity, a shared appreciation for the simple power of respect. The meeting ended with a handshake, a firm grip that conveyed more than words ever could. A promise of continued connection, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged between them. Richard Hogan Jr. didn't keep the story to himself. He felt compelled to share it, to let others know about the stranger's act of kindness. He wrote a post on social media, a heartfelt tribute to his father and a thank you to Keith Quinlan. He described the scene on the highway, the man in the t-shirt, the crisp salute. He expressed his gratitude, his awe, his profound respect. The post went viral. It resonated with people touched their hearts, reminded them of the good in the world. People shared it, commented on it, liked it. They were moved by Keith's simple gesture, by his unwavering respect, by his willingness to stand in the freezing cold to honor a stranger. The story spread beyond social media. Local news outlets picked it up, interviewing Richard Jr. and Keith. They told their story, their voices filled with emotion, their message resonating with a wider audience. The story became a symbol of hope, of kindness, of human connection. It reminded people that even in the darkest of times, there's still good in the world. It reminded them that small acts of kindness can have a profound impact, that a simple gesture can make a difference. Keith Quinlan, the ordinary truck driver, became an unlikely hero. He didn't seek the attention, didn't want the accolades. He was just a man who had done what he felt was right. But his actions had inspired others, had sparked a wave of positivity, had reminded people of the importance of respect, of gratitude, of community. The story of Keith Quinlan and Sergeant Richard Hogan became a testament to the power of human connection. It showed that even strangers can be connected by shared values, by shared experiences, by shared humanity. It showed that even in the face of loss and grief, there is still room for kindness, for compassion, for hope. The ripple effect of Keith's simple act continued to spread. People started paying it forward, performing their own acts of kindness, honoring others, showing respect. The story became a reminder that we are all connected, that we all have a responsibility to look out for each other, to support each other, to honor each other. And it all started with a man, a truck, a rearview mirror, and a salute. A final, silent tribute to a life well lived, a service well rendered. A testament to the enduring power of the human spirit.